Montana wilderness, dusk settling over early November 1881. Frost decorated the evergreen boughs, casting the forest clearing in a silence only untamed lands could hold. A modest dwelling stood partially completed, its hewn logs weathered but solid. Autumn air drifted through timber gaps, carrying pine resin's scent and winter's warning. "Miss, I assumed this area was deserted, but I was clearly mistaken." The words emerged from the forest edge, measured and quiet. Bearing the subtle accent of a man accustomed to livestock and solitude, Eleanor Sullivan rose gradually. Palm pressed against her aching spine, fingers wrapped around her hammer's grip. She pivoted to discover a mounted figure observing her from the clearing's border. His chestnut gelding pawing frozen earth, Eleanor's pulse hammered against her chest. She hadn't encountered another person in more than 7 days, not since the Kowalskis delivered flour and cautioned about early snowfall. Her eyes sharpened. "This property belongs to me. If you've lost your way, ride westward. I'll find nothing here." The stranger touched his hat brim. "I intend no harm, ma'am. Simply patrolling my family's land boundaries. Leighton Hartwell's the name Circle H Ranch, 10 miles north." He paused, gaze shifting from the incomplete structure to her worn gloves. Wasn't expecting to discover someone constructing solo? Eleanor's expression remained guarded. "That's how I prefer things." Clayton dismounted with fluid motion, leading his mount several paces nearer while maintaining respectful space, boots crackling over crystalline grass. "No insult intended, ma'am. Most ladies don't tackle this sort of labor." His attention moved to the wall framework, then to her rounded middle. "Particularly in your circumstances. I didn't come to match most ladies." Eleanor lifted her tool, again striking the nail with confident, measured blows. Her exhalation formed clouds in the frigid air. "I came to begin again." Clayton observed her momentarily, then retreated, lifting both palms slightly to demonstrate peaceful intent. "Fair point. Just thought you might require assistance with heavy materials, carrying an infant and constructing shelter simultaneously. Takes considerable courage. I possess courage. What I lack is time for charity." She turned back, hoisting another plank into position. Her movement showed more effort now, weighted by the growing life beneath her ribs, yet she persevered. "So if you're offering sympathy, carry it back to Circle H." Clayton studied her carefully. Determination marked her bearing, but something else lingered to exhaustion, masked by pride. He witnessed not a woman breaking down, but one maintaining everything through sheer willpower. "Not sympathy," he said eventually. "Just admiration." Eleanor remained silent initially, hammering until the board held firm. Then she regarded him, truly looked. This man possessed the bearing of comfortable upbringing, but creases around his eyes spoke of grief. His clothing was neat, yet his hands bore calluses. Something in his demeanor flickered with what she hadn't seen recently: comprehension. "I've encountered enough people wanting to repair things," she said, voice gentler now. "I'm not damaged, merely building." Clayton nodded. "Understood," remounted. But before turning toward the aspens, he hesitated. "Should you reconsider, ma'am, if you ever require anything? Circle H isn't distant." Eleanor didn't respond. She watched him ride away, vanishing between trees. Only after his departure did she lean against the half-completed wall and breathe deeply. The child within her stirred a gentle flutter in her belly. She pressed her palm there, eyes fixed where he'd disappeared. "That's not the kind of man who passes by accidentally," she murmured, though she wouldn't voice it. Her heart had stirred. To not with alarm, but something more frightening: hope. 3 days afterward, dawn's sun suspended low, casting elongated shadows across the frozen landscape. Eleanor stood beside her partially finished dwelling, a rough pine plank balanced precariously against her shoulder. Her lower spine ached with each breath, fingers rigid from cold and toil. The baby had settled lower recently, bringing fresh heaviness that transformed each task into a mountain. Still, she labored. She had to. She'd driven foundation stakes herself, transported each log from woodland, using only a borrowed cart in determination. Her provisions were stored securely in the root cellar. Her chimney now drew cleanly with smoke. Walls remained incomplete, and snow whispered of harder days approaching. She lowered the plank with a grunt, breath hitching as sharp pain sliced across her side. "You're pushing beyond limits." The voice, deep, familiar, startled her. She spun, heart racing, discovering Clayton Hartwell beside his chestnut gelding at the clearing's edge. He carried a bundle wrapped in checkered fabric. He appeared less formal today, no vest, no gloves, just a wool jacket, and eyes that perceived too much. Eleanor tightened her grip on the hammer. "I didn't request company." "No," he said gently, "but I decided to come regardless." He advanced slowly and placed the bundle atop a stump. "My mother prepared this tea for morning sickness and baby garments," she knitted. "Said you'd likely pretend not to need them, but to bring them anyway." She would. Eleanor stared at the bundle without moving. Clayton examined her cabin walls. "Coming along well. You've accomplished all this independently." She gave a sharp nod. "Every nail. Impressive." He glanced at her belly, then her hands. "Agonizing too, I'd guess." Eleanor crossed her arms, bracing against cold and something warmer she didn't want to acknowledge. "Why are you truly here, Mr. Hartwell? Slumming or collecting tales for your mother?" Clayton's gaze didn't waver. "I came because I wanted to, and because I disliked imagining you enduring pain alone when it doesn't have to be so. I'm not charity. I never claimed you were." She stepped forward, voice taut. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've survived. Men like you offer assistance like it's divine blessing, but there's always a cause to expectations, judgments." Remained quiet initially, letting her words hang in the morning frost. Then softly, "Some folks offer help, not because they think you're weak, but because they respect your strength." Eleanor blinked, caught unprepared. Clayton continued, quieter. "Now, I've watched many people crumble under less than what you're bearing. Yet here you stand, creating something substantial alone, with no audience, no applause. That's not weakness, that's extraordinary." She swallowed hard, mouth dry. "I won't linger," he added, gesturing toward the bundle. "I just thought you could use the tea. And perhaps a reminder that not everyone who appears is seeking to fix or claim you." Eleanor looked at the bundle, then at him. The sincerity in his voice disturbed her more than any flirtation could have. He meant it. "You can leave it there," she said finally. He nodded once, turned, and walked toward his horse. She watched his departure, pulse louder than the wind. When he disappeared into the trees, she released a breath she hadn't realized she'd held. She approached the stump and unwrapped the cloth. Inside were 3 tiny knit garments, soft yellow wool, carefully stitched hand, a tin of tea leaves that smelled faintly of ginger and mint. For the first time since arriving in Montana, something in her chest fractured, not enough to collapse, just enough to feel. 7 days later, wind had intensified again, slipping through gaps in the unfinished cabin walls, rattling loose nails like bones rattling. Eleanor sat beside what would become the hearth, currently just stones marking a future fireplace's outline. Her hands were crimson from handling lumber, breath forming clouds before her face. Clayton knelt across from her, positioning another log near the growing pile. They'd worked all morning side by side, no proclamations, no excess words, just the rhythm of hammers and occasional breathless laughter when boards refused to cooperate and splintered in protest. He handed her the canteen. She accepted without hesitation. "Now you're twice your original size," he said, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "I had to become so," she replied, staring into the dancing flames of a fire barely surviving. "I didn't have the privilege of waiting for rescue." He settled beside her, pulling his coat tighter. She didn't look at him when she spoke next. "I was wed in Boston. Formal ceremony, ivory gloves, roses, the complete spectacle. He departed 6 months later, claiming the child wasn't his." Clayton turned his head slowly, expression unreadable. "I never revealed the truth to him," Eleanor continued. "That the child was indeed his, that timing aligned perfectly, saw no purpose. He left before I could speak the words." Silence pressed between them. She exhaled. "The divorce documents were Never completed, not entirely. Legally, I remain his wife. He stayed quiet momentarily. That's a considerable burden to bear. Eleanor let her gaze fall to the boards beneath them. It's not something I announce. People already regard me as damaged goods. Adding legally married hardly inspires confidence. Clayton gave a quiet nod. People judge quickly what they don't comprehend. She glanced sideways. You haven't asked if I still love him? No, he said softly. I figure if you did, you wouldn't be here. She blinked once, then twice. Her throat constricted unexpectedly. What about you? She asked, voice barely audible above the wind. You don't seem like someone who rides alone merely for peace and quiet. He looked towards snowy hills. Her name was Sarah, my wife. We married young, perhaps too young. She enjoyed racing horses, took a gelding too fast one morning, and broke her neck on the ridge east of our ranch. Eleanor's heart stilled. I discovered her myself. I was 28. That was 5 winters ago. Since then, I ride, mend fences, keep to myself, not from fear of loving again, just didn't see the purpose. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. So am I, he said. But I'm still here. So are you. Wind howled outside, snow spiraling in bursts. Across the cabin's open doorway, he worked several hours more, he chiseling boards for roof framing while she measured door lengths. Their movements found harmony neither commented upon, as if speaking would shatter the spell. When sun dipped behind peaks, casting long violet shadows across the valley, they sat again on the half-finished porch. Eleanor wrapped her shawl around her belly, gloved hands trembling slightly from exertion. Clayton offered his coat. She declined. But after a moment she said quietly, It feels safer doing everything alone, but maybe it's just lonelier. Clayton looked at her not with pity, not with possession, just something steadier, warmer. Maybe, he said, and wind. For once passed softly through timber walls, as if deciding momentarily not to drive them apart. Late autumn, wind curling through the valley, carrying whispers. By the time first frost glazed tall grasses around Eleanor's cabin, wind carried more than cold, it carried voices, rumor fragments laced with curiosity and judgment. Drifting into town with every passing wagon, they discussed a woman alone in wilderness, too proud for charity, too stubborn for society's mold. But more than that, they discussed the visits. Clayton Hartwell, a respected rancher's son seen frequently riding south, staying too long near a half-built home, and a woman wearing shame-like armor. Eleanor had heard whispers at Willowbrook's general store when trading eggs for flour. The clerk's polite smile grew tight-lipped. The Kowalskis, kind as they'd been, had grown cautious. Their questions more clipped. She pretended not to notice until one cold morning ground hard beneath boots. Air sharp with pine and secrets when an unfamiliar carriage rolled into her clearing. The woman who emerged moved like someone born to command rooms. Her coat was imported wool, gloves finest leather, hair pinned in elaborate twists, speaking of servants and salons. Miss Sullivan, the woman said crisply, adjusting her skirts while surveying the modest porch. I am Victoria Morrison. I imagine my name has reached you, formally or otherwise. Eleanor didn't speak initially, straightening with hand instinctively. Covering her swelling belly. I know of you, she replied, voice calm. Victoria's gaze swept the cabins, sawdust, unpainted walls, then settled on Eleanor. Then I'll be direct. This arrangement, whatever exists between you and Mr. Hartwell, must end. Eleanor lifted her chin. There is no arrangement. And end the association. He visits frequently. People talk. His family name is being dragged through every parlor in Willowbrook and beyond. I never asked him to come, but you never sent him away either, did you? Victoria's smile was tight, brittle. You allowed him to stay to help. Now my fiancé hesitates, setting a wedding date while the town wonders if he's fathering another man's child. Lenore's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. He's a free man, Miss Morrison. I haven't seduced him, nor do I seek his name. Or fortune. No, just his attention, his time, his reputation. Victoria stepped forward. You think I'm heartless, that I don't understand hardship. but I do. What I won't accept is allowing scandal to blossom while good men lose standing, because of misplaced chivalry. Eleanor felt nails dig into her palms. I built this cabin alone, she said. My own firewood, sewed clothes for a child who will never know legitimacy's comfort. I've asked nothing of your fiancé but kindness. I've kept to myself. Not. Enough, Victoria snapped. Because your presence haunts him, and your silence lets the world imagine the worst. She drew breath, cold mist curling from her lips. Leave, sell the land. Go east or disappear into some town that will accept a woman in your situation. But don't remain here, not where he can see you, not where his future is being whittled. Away one scandalous story at a time. Eleanor felt heat rise in her face. You don't own him. I know how this world works, Victoria said. Men fall in love with ideas, romantic fictions about strength wrapped in suffering, but they marry respectability. They marry the path of least resistance. She stepped back. Make it easier on him, on all of us, before this ends worse. When carriage wheels vanished into forest and silence returned, Eleanor stood motionless. Cold bit through her shawl. Breath came ragged. Later she would sweep the porch, restack logs Clayton had chopped last week. She would boil tea and feel the baby kick beneath her ribs. But for now, she stood on that porch, body aching and heart heavier than any lumber beam she'd lifted. She looked out into wilderness that had become her only refuge. Then she whispered to no one, "Am I destroying the only good man who ever looked at me without pity?" Early winter, snowfall steady. Earth hushed beneath a white blanket. The storm came quietly but persistently. Snow clung to trees like lacework, chimney smoke curling silently above Eleanor's cabin. She sat by the fire, hands wrapped around a tin cup of tea long since gone cold. Days had passed since Victoria Morrison's visit, since those sharp words carved through her defenses, leaving something far more dangerous than fear. Doubt each. Time wind whistled through trees. She braced for another confrontation, for Clayton to arrive with anger in his voice or disappointment in his eyes. But when he came, he brought neither. Hoofbeats reached her ears before the knock, deliberate, familiar. She opened the door before he could raise his hand. Snowflakes scattered off his shoulders and hat brim. His coat was dusted white, cheeks red from cold and conviction. "Eleanor," he said, voice low and calm, "I need to talk to you." She stepped aside. "You shouldn't be here, to be exactly here," he answered, entering. Fire flickered against his features as he removed gloves. His movements were different now. Hesitation, no polite uncertainty, just resolve. She stood near the hearth, arms folded over her belly as if shielding both herself and the life inside from what was coming. "I went home," he began, "and told my father the engagement's finished. I told him I wouldn't marry Victoria Morrison, that I wouldn't be shamed into building a life I don't believe in." Eleanor's breath caught. He was furious, Clayton said simply. "Threatened to disown me, called me a fool, but I didn't back down." "Clayton," she began, but he raised a hand. "I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because you need to understand. This isn't about pity or rebellion or romantic fantasy." He stepped closer, voice gentling. "This is about choosing. What's real? This place? That child? I've seen more truth in how you hold a hammer than in every ballroom conversation of my life." Eleanor blinked, throat tightening. "You can't throw your future away on scandal," she whispered. "I'm not throwing anything away," he replied. "I'm building something new." Long silence filled the space between them. Only fire crackled softly in the hearth. Eleanor turned her face to flames. Her hands trembled. "There's something you don't." "No," she said, voice barely above breath. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." Clayton waited. His silence was steady, unflinching. "I'm not divorced," she said. "Legally, I remain married to Charles Whitmore, the man who left. The moment I told him I was expecting." Clayton's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. "I thought it was finished. I left Boston with papers unsigned, believing he would file them, but no document ever arrived, no final decree. I didn't have strength to pursue it. I just wanted to disappear." She turned toward him now, eyes shining with guilt and shame. I'm not a widow. I'm not free. I'm someone else's wife, at least legally. You deserve to know before you throw your life into ruin for someone who can't give you anything in return." Words hung in air like frost sharp and glinting. Clayton stepped forward until he stood directly before her. Then, without hesitation, he reached out and took her hands, rough, calloused hands that had built a home from nothing. "You think this changes how I feel?" he said softly. She tried to pull back, but he held fast, gentle and firm. "It only makes me want to fight harder for you." Her breath hitched. "I've seen what you've endured. I know the cost you've paid, and I see you still choosing to stand, still choosing to build. That doesn't make you a burden, that makes you braver than anyone I know. I can't offer you anything," she whispered. "Not a name, not a proper future, just this silence and snow and a child not yet born." "You offered me truth," Clayton said. "You offered me something real. It's more than I ever had with anyone else." She looked up at him, now truly looked. What she saw was not pity, not charity, it was love. Fire crackled behind them as wind sighed against cabin walls. For the first time since the world had turned against her, Eleanor felt the weight in her. Chest began to shift, not gone but shared. Clayton's hand never left hers, and neither did his promise. Deep winter, wind-stirring pines, moonlight silvering snow-covered clearing. The cabin stood like a defiant heartbeat in wilderness, framed by bare trees and distant wolf songs. Inside, Eleanor Sullivan sat at her workbench, hands wrapped around the carved cradle's rail, heart pounding with something she couldn't name, not fear, not joy, something between. A breath held too long. Clayton stood near the hearth, his shadow stretching toward her like an unspoken promise. "You shouldn't have returned," she said quietly. He didn't move. "You knew I would." Eleanor's eyes met his momentarily before returning to the floor. "It doesn't matter what we feel. You know that?" "Clayton, we can't rewrite law or erase judgment." "I'm not trying to rewrite anything," he answered. "I'm just trying to write something that finally feels true." She stood abruptly, hands pressing her lower back as her belly shifted. The child inside kicked hard, as if sensing the storm beneath her skin. "You think love will make this easier?" she snapped. "It doesn't. Love doesn't silence gossip. It doesn't file divorce papers. It doesn't buy land or raise a child or shield us from a town waiting for me to fall apart." "I don't care about the town," Clayton said. "You should," she flared, voice shaking, "'cause it will care about you, about the son of Circle H choosing a married woman with an illegitimate child. And scandal for a past." Clayton's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "He's not illegitimate. He's yours, and that makes him better than most men I've known." Eleanor felt breath rush from her lungs. She turned away, one hand trembling as it braced against the window frame. "I've spent every night for months wondering if I was strong enough to do this alone," she whispered. "And now that someone offers to carry some of that weight, all I feel is fear." Clayton crossed the floor silently until he stood behind her close enough for his warmth to reach her through space. "Why fear?" he asked. "'Cause I've loved before," she answered, barely audible. "And I was wrong, 'cause I believed words that turned to ash in my mouth, 'cause I trusted a man to stay. And he left without even asking if the child was his." Clayton's voice was low. "And now you think I'll do the same?" She didn't answer. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Shh, Eleanor," he said. "I know what it is to lose someone, to have the ground ripped from under your feet. My wife died on a morning that started like any other. One minute she was laughing about my coffee being too strong. The next her horse bolted and she never opened her eyes again." She turned slowly, face-stricken. "I buried her under a cottonwood tree," he said. "Every day since, I've lived like the world owed me nothing. I stopped believing in fate, in joy, in any of it." He cupped her face, then gentle, reverent. "Until I rode into your clearing and saw you driving a nail like it owed you rent." A single startled laugh broke from her throat, half sob, half disbelief. "You're not some lost woman I stumbled across," he continued. "You're the fire I didn't know I needed. And I don't want to lose that, not because of laws I didn't write. It's not because of people too cowardly to build something for themselves." Eleanor's hands came up, touching his wrists, but not pushing him. "Away? I don't know how to let you in, she said softly. I've built so many walls I forgot where the door is. He leaned his forehead to hers, voice breaking. Then let me help you find it. For a moment the world narrowed to just them, snow outside, warmth within, and a fragile thread of hope pulling tight. I lost my wife before, Clayton whispered, voice full of memory and new resolve. I won't lose you tonight, when I finally found something worth keeping. Eleanor closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The sky turned lead, colored by late afternoon. Eleanor gripped the porch railing as biting wind stirred pines into nervous whispers. The baby had been restless all morning, kicking low and sharp. As if sensing what approached, snow fell heavy, thick, and fast. Within an hour, the world disappeared in white. Eleanor lit every lamp, laid out towels, boiled water, pulse wild with dread. Then it struck contraction like fire, stealing breath, doubling her over. She clutched the table, eyes wide with pain. Not now, she whispered. Not like this. She was alone. Miles away, Clayton Hartwell saddled his finest horse. The sky's turn told him everything she needed him. Instinct screamed louder than reason. He rode into the storm, but it swallowed him. Visibility vanished. His horse slipped on a drift and fell, flinging him into a frozen creek. Ice stole air from his lungs. Pain lanced his shoulder. He lay there momentarily, snow settling on his lashes. She needs me, he groaned, dragging himself from water. The horse was gone, so he walked through waist-high snow and screaming wind one step at a time. At the cabin, Eleanor fought screaming, bleeding, her body burned and broke. She cried out for strength, for her father, for mercy. The storm rattled. Walls. And then a cryra. Beautiful her baby. A boy, she sobbed, cradling him, kissing damp skin, whispering every prayer she'd ever known. But Clayton hadn't returned, and the storm was worsening. Fear clawed at her chest. What if he was lost? What if she had survived this moment only? To lose the one man who had seen her not as a burden, but as something worth loving? She rocked her son with silent tears falling. You'll be safe, she whispered, even if it's just me. Knock faint. Then firmer. She froze. The door opened. Clayton stood there soaked in snow, blood on his shirt, face pale with pain. She gasped. He stumbled inside, dropped to his knees near the fire. Steam rose from his coat. His breath came shallow. And then he saw the baby. Their eyes met. No words. He reached out, hand trembling, brushing the tiny fist at her chest. Looks like you've already built a family, Miss Sullivan, he murmured. Mind if I join? Her throat closed. She could have said, no, should have. Maybe, but instead, she shifted the baby into his arms. Only if you're sure, she whispered. I've never been more sure. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, a new kind of warmth took hold of home, a promise. A beginning neither had dared to dream. And this time, Eleanor knew she was not alone anymore. The first sign of spring was not flowers or melting snow, but earth's soft give under Eleanor's boots. Mud welcomed her steps. Birds began singing again, and pine scent warmed in sunlight. Inside the cabin, fire still crackled. But warmth also came from laughter of two people who had once known only silence. Eleanor stepped outside with bucket in. Han, newborn son, cradled against her chest in a linen sling. Clayton knelt nearby, driving the first post for what would soon be the new kitchen. This soil's soft early, he called, glancing up with a grin. She smiled back. Or maybe it knows we've got work to do. He stood, dusting off his hands. Either way, we need more room specially for that growing boy. They had named him Thomas No. Grand declarations, just something steady and true. That afternoon, Lenore sat at the table, signing a letter to a Boston law office, her official request for divorce from Charles Whitmore. Her hand trembled slightly as she sealed it. Clayton entered then, sawdust on his sleeves and sun in his smile. You did it, she nodded. Last piece of the past, sealed and sent. He kissed her forehead. I'm proud of you. They didn't celebrate. With rings or a preacher just supper with the Kowalskis and a few neighbors, Eleanor made stew. Clayton hung lanterns. When sky turned lavender, he stood and took her hand. "She is the strongest woman I've ever known," he said. "I thought I was coming here to help her, but she saved me." Eleanor smiled softly. No rings, but plenty of roots. Guests toasted with tin cups. No one asked for documents. Out here, love was proven in firewood, not signatures. A week later, Lenore stepped outside to see Clayton finishing the new kitchen door. She had asked what he was working on, but he only said to wait. Now, in late light, she saw it a horseshoe-shaped and smoothed, bolted as the handle. "Found it bent near the pasture," he said. "Thought it was scrap, but turns out it just needed shaping." She traced it with her fingers. "Like some people," and nodded. "Broken things can still carry weight if they're strong enough." Wildflowers bloomed. Thomas grew. In one golden evening, Eleanor sat at her writing desk with a piece of her father's old blue stationery. She wrote, "Dear Pa, you said once that a home was not a place, but a feeling. I didn't believe you then, but now I do. I built a cabin, hauled wood, shaped the roof, fought storms. I did it for me and my boy, but it took a stubborn cowboy with dusk in his eyes and a heart like yours to make it feel like home. Alone anymore, love, your Eleanor." She folded the letter and placed it in her father's old tin mailbox. Sighed. Thomas laughed, his first real laugh. Clayton, fixing a fence post, looked up. Eleanor walked toward him, baby in arms, heart full. Wind carried pine scent and promise. Spring had come, and with it everything she had never dared to dream. If you made it to the end of this story, if your heart clenched when Eleanor stood alone in the storm, if you saw a piece of yourself in Clayton's quiet vow, "I won't lose you," too, then you already understand. Love in the Wild West was never given. It was built from pine beams and calloused hands, from sleepless nights and silent prayers, from scars no one spoke of unless someone stayed long enough to listen. If Eleanor and Clayton's journey moved you, if you believe love can survive law, loss, and snowfall, then hit subscribe and join us here at Wild West Echoes. Because every week, there's another story waiting, of hearts crossing deserts, of last embraces beside firelight, of people daring to believe in each other even when the world tells them not to. We tell the stories that slow your breath, that make you smile, that might just make you cry, sometimes if we're lucky, make you believe again. This is Wild West Echoes, where bullets might miss, but hearts never do.